Sairam, dear listeners, and welcome to a very special episode of Tryst with Divinity. Mrs. Phyllis Krystal was born in London, England in 1914. She started her career as a high school teacher before moving to the United States. There, she married Mr. Sidney Krystal, a prominent Los Angeles attorney. In the late 1950s, Mrs. Krystal and a close friend embarked on a spiritual experiment to connect with an inner source of wisdom, which they eventually called the high C for higher consciousness. As a result of their inner explorations, they developed techniques to enable the individual to seek help and guidance from the high C within rather than from external sources. In January 1973, at the age of 59, Mrs. Phyllis Krystal and her late husband, Mr. Sidney Krystal, came to see Bhagawan Satya Sai Baba right here in Whitefield, Bangalore. She has captured the first decade of her mystical journey to the avatar and its transformational impact on their lives in her book, Sai Baba, The Ultimate Experience. With Baba confirming the teachings she had been downloading from her high C, Mrs. Krystal continued her inner work, and for over 25 years, she has been giving seminars in numerous countries. In the year 2004, at the age of 91, she moved to Munich, Germany, and at the age of 95, she moved again to Zurich in Switzerland. Currently, she is in Bangalore, India, where she is guiding eager learners to reconnect to their high C. She maintains that this hunger to tap into a real self is an innate human calling. The goal is to break from any dependence on external authority figures and to seek release from old habits, beliefs, fears, customs, and other influences, particularly those developed in childhood, and replace them by becoming an instrument of the high C. Mrs. Krystal has authored a number of books connected with her work and Sai Baba's teachings, and these include Cutting the Ties That Bind, Taming the Monkey Mind, Reconnecting with Love Energy, and Sealing on Desires. A picture of poise and elegance, at 99, Mrs. Krystal remains a force to reckon with. At Radio Sai, are we ever honored to be in her presence to record this interview. Sairam, Mrs. Krystal, and a very warm welcome to Radio Sai.
Thank you, and Sairam to you.
Mrs. Krystal, let's start with some girl talk. At 99, you look beautiful. You have a glowing skin, a great head of hair, and a lovely smile. And I understand you live mostly on your own, yes, and travel, and you cook for yourself, yes, and you continue to teach actively. How do you do it all?
Only when I tune into Baba's energy. That's the only way. That's the only way for any of us.
I guess you're tuned to his energy 24/7, all the time.
I wish it were all the time, but we forget. We get caught up in the world, and then we forget. But I think we all need to have some way to remind ourselves.
You do too?
Oh yes.
Hard to believe. Now, Mrs. Krystal, through your experience of counseling people for decades, how do you foresee the future of the human race? Where do you see us evolving over weeks, over months, over decades from now?
That's a very difficult question to answer, because I myself wonder how on earth there could be a change from the way the world is and the people in it at the moment. What's going to happen to make them available or to make them fit in to what Baba calls the golden age? It has to be his miracle.
That takes me to my next question. All this buzz about the golden age, the seismic shift in human consciousness, what do you read into it?
I don't know how it's going to happen, of course, only Baba knows that, but there has to be some sort of an event or some sort of a happening that will force people to let go of the material world more and more. That's why I think he gave us the Sealing on Desires program, to let go of our attachment to what we want and our refusal for things we don't want. So this is a good basis, and as he told us, especially when he gave me the long interview to introduce it, he explained that the only thing that keeps us from becoming one with our own God force is our desires. So these were gentle steps just to cut out waste. If he had told us to let go of all our desires, we couldn't. It would be too much of a shock. So it was gentle steps. But people didn't even want to take those gentle steps. And he did tell me that this was the only program of all of his teachings which would take us to enlightenment. The only one, the only spiritual exercise he gave us to do.
So basically not to waste food, time.
First was money, because he said depending upon your money are your desires. And that's when he told me that the village people were fortunate to that extent because they didn't have as much money, therefore they didn't have as many desires. But the more money we have, the more we can take care of our desires, satisfy our desires. So it's all very logical.
Makes complete sense. But somehow, as you said, it didn't become very popular, and it's still not actively practiced.
Because people don't want to give up their desires. They want what they want, what they want. And that's why we have, in the method I've been shown, that we have so many exercises just gently to get rid of what we want and ask what our God self or our high C or our Baba self wants. Thy will, not mine. But nobody wants to live that way, or very few. But gradually, people are getting to the point where their life is so puzzling, so demanding, that they're seeking a better way. It's just beginning.
I see. Now you said maybe an event has to take place for the golden age to be ushered in. What kind of an event do you foresee? Some people talk of a cataclysmic event. What do you foresee?
Well, there have been many, many predictions. But I have no idea. I keep thinking something must happen, because to go from the Kali Yuga to a golden age, how can that happen when we look around? So I have no idea. Only Baba knows.
Mm-hmm.
I should be interested if I'm still here.
And you just might be. Who knows?
Who knows?
Exactly. Now, in all your works, you mentioned that when you started this inner experimentation, the exploration, you had a friend who worked with you.
Yes.
We don't hear much about her. Is her name Virginia?
Yes, but
did she ever come to Baba? Who was she?
No, she was very much older than I was at the time. And then unfortunately, she got dementia and Parkinson's disease. So she, unfortunately for me, she didn't even know the first book was published. But her daughter, who's Peggy Lenny, who takes care of many of the emails and other things for me, I think gave her mother a wonderful service, as she insisted on taking her home, not leave her in the hospital where they were force-feeding her, because Virginia did not want to eat. She wanted just to let go. And so her daughter allowed her to do that. And she also played audio cassettes of some of the seminars I was giving. And so Virginia was able to see how the work was progressing. So that was a wonderful gift.
And did she know about Baba?
She did, but she never became a devotee. It was not her path. But it didn't make any difference. We were only aware that we had within us a guide which we called the high C for higher consciousness, and that she believed in. In fact, that's what brought us together in the work, in the method.
Mrs. Krystal, when for you is your high C or higher consciousness and Bhagawan Sri Satya Sai Baba the same, one and the same?
For me, he personifies, yes, the God within us, because he makes it very clear that we're not the body, we're not this personality. This is just the temple, he called it one time. He came into the interview room and looking around at us and said, you don't realize you're all walking temples. And it was such a wonderful way to express it, that the body, the personality, the people that we think we are just the house or the temple in which the God self lives. He said, that's your identity. You're all God's. And in one interview, he knew how shy I was, and he was the only one in this whole world who could have brought me out of that shyness to do what I'm doing now. He was absolutely determined. And so in one interview, he came in again, laughing and singing and saying, you don't know who you are. And we thought, well, we thought we did. He said, no, you're all God. And then he turned to me in the back of the room, hiding as usual, and he said, say I'm God, Mrs. Krystal. I couldn't. I was brought up in the Church of England, and I would have been beaten alive if I dared to say I was God. I said, I'm sorry, I can't say I'm God, Mrs. Krystal. Oh, Baba, I can't say I'm God, Mrs. Krystal. So to get it over with, I said, I'm God. That was not satisfying him at all. He said, louder. And so I did a little louder. Louder, louder, louder. He was absolutely determined to have me making a statement in front of all these people, I am God. So finally I was even shouting it, and he was satisfied. But this is what he wanted to teach us, that that's our reality, and that's the part that doesn't die when our bodies die. But we are so identified with our bodies that we think that we're eliminated when we die. And that's why I don't have any fear of death. And I love to share it with people, because it's so sad. So many people are terrified of death.
What happens according to you when we die?
Well, my experience of helping people to die is that their real self or their God self just goes out through the top of their head, and you can almost see it. It's like a sort of a smoky outline. And then, as far as I know, of course I haven't died and come back, but I have had 3 different out-of-body experiences when I was extremely ill. And all I can say is that the experience that I had was that everything was so beautiful. The light was wonderful, the colors, the music, and it was always, everything was very joyful. It was not a scary experience at all. And there's always a welcoming committee to greet us. And my younger daughter, who was killed in a car accident a long time ago, she keeps in touch from her level, and she assures us that it's a wonderful experience. And she always sounds so happy. So I would love to be able to help people get rid of that terrible fear of death, because it spoils our life to be constantly afraid. We can't be joyful now when we're so afraid. Mm-hmm.
You spoke of this welcoming committee. So when you had this out-of-body experience, mm-hmm. who did you see in your welcome committee? People, your ancestors, your family members?
I was only vaguely aware in those days that there were people welcoming us, but they all told me, no, this is not your time. And so I had to come back. And one of the times I was given a choice, but I had two very small children, and so I asked myself, who would look after my 2 children, 2 daughters, if I died? And I thought of each one separately, and I thought, no. So my decision was made, and I came back. And I'm so glad I did.
And so are we. I'm sure so is the world. Now, all of us have this are supposed to have a connection with our high C, our higher consciousness. But what is it that keeps coming in our way to be consistently and clearly connected?
Our own desires, our own belief that we're this little body, and the time, the rushing of time now, the hurry, the constant being the doer. And of course, as we all know, Baba says that we must not be the doer. There's only one doer, and that's Baba. We should always just be the instrument. So I love to be able to teach people just to stop this awful rush. I must do this, I must do that. Have I forgotten that? What should I be doing now? It's worldwide, and we have to keep tuned in and ask, how do you want to use me now? And if you do that all day long, so much more will be accomplished. It's incredible. It's the only way I can do what I'm doing at my ancient age.
And now you travel and you give seminars, so don't you ever feel rushed or stressed? Oh dear, I have to be on time, I have to get this done. None of that gets to you?
Oh, I'm very human, yes. Of course I do. But then I remember, at least I hope I remember, and then I say, sorry, I'm taking over. Well, how do you want to use me now? But I don't always remember. But you see, people get so upset when they forget, and that wastes time and energy. So I always say, forget it. Just, you made the mistake, just forget it, and now just get tuned in again. And so there are many different ways to keep tuned in.
Mrs. Krystal, do you ever get angry?
I get tired, I get sleepy, yes.
Angry?
And I get tired when I'm not working. When I'm working, I never get tired.
What about getting upset or losing your temper?
Oh yes, I'm very human.
Hard to believe.
But very often it looks like I'm upset or I'm angry, but I have to listen all the time to see what Baba wants me to say, and sometimes he'll put something into my head and I'll say, Baba, mentally, I can't say that, but then nothing else happens, so I'm just standing there or sitting there silent, so I have to say it. And sometimes it seems awfully violent, but if I'm an instrument, I can't choose. He chooses how to use all of us. We don't have any choice.
Including when you have to put on this angry act.
That's right.
And now, Mrs. Krystal, is so interesting. At the age of 91, you relocated to Germany, and at 95, you moved again to Switzerland. Why?
Well, moving to Switzerland was definitely Baba's demand. And we had an interview with my daughter and my granddaughter and I was supposed to be a speaker with 3 other ladies, and it was a small one. And he almost immediately said, I want you to move to Switzerland, Mrs. Krystal. And I was so in shock. I couldn't ask why, where, when, nothing. I was numb. Move at my age, and I'd already moved to Germany, and now I had to move to Switzerland. And then I think he realized that I hadn't really understood or I hadn't really taken the whole message in. So again, he said, I do want you to move to Switzerland, Mrs. Krystal. And then I knew that that's what I had to do. So that's the only reason I did that.
And have you figured out why he had you move in retrospect?
No, I haven't. That's one thing I haven't found out. I would love to know.
I'm sure there's a good reason.
I'm sure there is.
I see. Now, let's talk about Baba's Mahasamadhi. He's leaving the body. For many people, it came as a shock because they had done their human calculation and they felt that Baba left at least 10 years prior to the time they expected. What do you make of this?
I don't pretend to know. If Baba wants to tell us, I'm sure he will. I'm sure he has his own agenda.
He does.
Quite sure he does. And I'm sure he will tell us when we're ready to accept it. But when we have a determination that he made a mistake or he disappointed us, that gets in the way. We have to be open and ask, what did you mean? And does it matter? You see, people are so busy with silly questions like that they forget that their only duty is to follow his teachings and change their own lives, not worry about someone else, even about Baba.
Very well said. Mrs. Krystal, what is High C's message for us right now, for the listeners of Radio Sai?
Keep in touch with who you really are, which Baba always, when he was speaking to me, called it God's self, because that's your true identity. This is just the role we're playing, and we need the body to play certain roles to learn what we didn't learn before in other lives. So we're being given a golden opportunity with his energy in the world. And he did say very clearly that because his energy is still in the world, he can accelerate our karma, and that way we will be able to get ready for the golden age much more easily.
What sort of a time frame, even in general terms, this golden age, when is it likely to come?
I have no idea. I don't think he ever told us. I guess when we're ready, I don't know.
But then, are we not chasing a mirage?
When he promises something, and he always says his mission will never fail. So if we're going to believe his teachings, we have to believe that one too.
Very rightly said. Well, I'm not going to say thank you to you, but what I will tell you is why we love you, Mrs. Krystal. Because you're such an inspiring role model, and...
No, I'm a threat.
I don't think so.
Oh, yes.
Why? Why do you think so? Why do you say that?
Well, people say at 99 I'm doing what I'm doing. Maybe they should be doing it too.
At 29, yes, of course. In that sense, because you represent the potential that we all want to live out. And for your love and simplicity, I just want to tell you, we are very grateful to you for granting us this interview.
But the only thing I always say is keep in touch with your own true self. That is the inner teacher. That's your inner guide. Not anybody else. Not even the organization. I'm sorry. My husband and Jack Hislop were the ones Baba chose to start the one in the States. But he made it very clear for me that that's where we're headed, to listen to our own high C or our own Baba self.
Very well said.
That is really a simple step, very difficult, because we're constantly being distracted from it. So we have to keep coming back to that.
Mrs. Krystal, do you have free time in your schedule when you're done your cooking and you're traveling? And do you pray every day? What is your day like?
I try to keep in touch during the day, which is what Baba told me to do. Because I asked him, are you going to give me a meditation? Are you going to give me a mantra? And he said, no mantra for you. Just use the so-hum breath. So and hum. And he sang it. And I started to sing it with him. And he said, oh no, not out loud, inside. So that was the, instead of the mantra. And apart from that, just live according to my teachings.
I see. Do you read books?
No, I don't.
You write them.
I used to read all the time, but he made it very clear, and one time asked me, do you want to have other people's opinion, other authorities, or do you want to tune in to the only authority that's really reliable, your own God self? And so of course I made my choice.
So you talk of this inner empowerment And your workshops are attended by people who believe in Baba as well as people who don't know about Baba. How do they receive what you have to offer?
Well, originally he told me to keep it separate because it would confuse people. And then gradually, as people became more familiar, then he obviously made it very clear. And I think the most clear time he made it, the time he made it the most clear, was at a youth conference where I was a speaker, and I gave it was youth, so it was Sai Youth, Messengers of Sai's Love. And so my first day, I spoke about when you're a messenger, you have something to give. And so I took them all through method which I've been shown, but this time there was Baba sitting there, so instead of using the maypole which I usually use to connect to our own high C, I said, here's Baba is sitting, imagine a ribbon between your heart and Baba's heart. And I kept thinking, are you sure you want me to do this? You've asked me to keep it separate. And I kept looking at him. He was grinning from ear to ear and nodding his head. And so that was the first breakthrough. That was the first time I ever did that. And then gradually, very, very slowly, he had me bring them together. And now I'm much more free because I wanted to keep to what he told me, and I really did faithfully for many, many, many years, and was highly criticized for it. I hope that I'm getting out from that very unpleasant persona by now, because it's much more comfortable for me to be able to share both the method, because let's face it, it was the Baba self inside of me who was giving me the message. So now I realize what he meant when he first caught sight of me in the darshan line at Whitefield. This is where I first met him, in Whitefield. And we were only about 5 Westerners, so with our pale faces and light hair, we stood out. So I was in the background a little bit. And as he wafted over to the ladies' side, he went beyond me. And I thought, oh, he's not my master, because I always knew that the master picks the chela, not the other way around. And when I thought that, he whirled around, faced me, and with the most incredible smile, said, so, long pause, you have come. Another long pause. At last. And at the time I thought, how could I have come any sooner? I didn't even know you were in the world until October of last year, and now it's January of the next year, only a few months. Now I understand that he'd been teaching me all this long time when I didn't even know he existed. And so finally I came in the body, so to speak, to his form. So now it took me all those many years to get to that understanding. And I think that's a very important understanding, because he within us, or what he represents, because he's the God force, but so are we, as he tells us. That's our only really reliable guide.
Mrs. Krystal, if you disagree with someone, or somebody disagrees with you, and that person thinks they are being guided by their high C, and the disagreement happens with you and you're being guided by your high C, where is the resolution in this?
I just have to keep to my own contact. And sometimes it's very difficult. And sometimes it comes out rather like anger, or it's so firm. But as I said before, I have no control over it. I have to see what comes out, what comes into my head. And if I don't say what comes in, nothing happens.
I see.
And then I just stand there or sit there speechless. So I think it's a matter of practice. People think they're in touch with their high C when they begin, but it's not an easy thing to give up what you want and listen to this inner voice. And we're all rushing, and there's so much noise in the world that we don't take time to be quiet and practice, but it takes practice to make sure. And I've always asked, when I am a little bit curious, not sure whether, where to go, if something comes to my mind and I think, oh dear, should I really say that? I asked one time for a sign, and to my utter surprise, it was as if somebody poured ice cold water down my spine. And so I always get that sign when I'm doubtful. So I think we need a sign to make sure. So I always tell people, ask for your own sign. And sometimes they'll get prickles in their fingers, or their heart will change beat. But we have to be very sure that we're not getting our own desires in the way. And it's a gradual withdrawal from our own ego, which always wants to get in the way and take over, to being an instrument. It takes time and practice.
Have you had to forgive a lot of people in your life?
Oh, of course.
Is it easy?
Sometimes not. But then I think, I always try to ask, well, what is this person in my life for? What am I to learn? And that's not always easy, because then you have to look at yourself. You see, it's useless. You can't change somebody else. It's impossible. You may think you do, but no. We can only change ourselves. That's our biggest job. And that's where the method is so helpful. Cutting the tide to anything that controls us other than the high C or the Baba self.
Thank you so very much.
You're so welcome.
Very grateful. Sairam, Mrs. Krystal.
Sairam.
It's an honor for me to sit across from you. I can't believe I'm doing this.
Oh, but we're just human beings. In fact, we're just parading as in a human form. But we're really, as he always tells us, we should identify with who we really are.
Beautiful. Thank you very much.
So don't be in awe, please, or honored. I'm just as human as you.
You're very humble. Beautiful.
Okay.
Sairam.
Sairam.